Historians cannot name the exact day when the Black Death entered Europe, and this matters, because for those who lived through it, it did not arrive suddenly. It crept in the mid-14th century. Europe lived by a familiar rhythm. Cities were growing, trade was expanding, roads connected continents. Merchants traveled from Asia, ships entered Mediterranean ports. Goods passed from hand to hand. The world seemed vast, but in reality it was crowded, dangerously crowded. The first troubling reports came from the East. People spoke of a strange disease, of entire settlements that seemed to vanish. These rumors reached Europe distorted, wrapped in fear and religious interpretation. Most people did not believe them. In the Middle Ages, people were always dying somewhere. That was not news. Then the disease appeared in the ports. Historical sources mention ships arriving from the south with part of their crews already dead and others gravely ill. Trading cities Genoa, Venice, Marseille became the first point of contact. There, the plague found ideal conditions: dense populations, constant movement of people, and a complete lack of medical understanding. It is important to understand, people did not know what was happening. There was no concept of infection, no understanding of how disease spread. What did exist was a belief that every event had a cause, and most often, that cause was supernatural. When the disease began to spread, it did not look like a war or a single catastrophe. There was no single day after which everything changed. Instead, there was a growing sense that something was slowly but inevitably breaking. In one house, people died faster than usual. Then in another, entire streets stopped opening their shops. The bells that once called people to prayer and celebration began to ring for different reasons. Cities responded in different ways. Some tried to close their gates. Others expelled foreigners. Some introduced primitive forms of isolation without understanding why they might help. These measures were late and chaotic. The disease moved faster than decisions. The plague made no distinctions. It struck the poor and the wealthy, craftsmen and priests, soldiers and children. This shattered the familiar worldview. Medieval society was strictly hierarchical, yet now order collapsed. Those meant to protect and heal died just like everyone else. Faith suffered a particularly heavy blow. The church had been a pillar of explanation and comfort, but prayers did not stop the disease. Priests died, monasteries emptied, rituals lost their certainty. This did not mean people stopped believing, but belief became anxious. By the height of the epidemic, fear had become a daily condition. People feared touch, neighbors, air, strangers. Society began to fragment into isolated pockets. Where there had once been community, suspicion took root, and yet the plague was not the end of the world, as many contemporaries believed. It was a turning point, but at the time no one knew this. People lived day by day, unaware that they were witnessing an event that would change the course of European history. In the next part, we will see how fear began to change people, their faith, their behavior, and the very idea of human life. When the plague ceased to be a rumor, it became an experience. Personal, everyday, inevitable. Sources from the 14th century show that people quickly realized this was no ordinary disease. Death came too often, too close, too unpredictably. It did not follow familiar explanations. Those who were healthy yesterday could be gone today. Entire households sometimes perished. Sometimes entire neighborhoods vanished. Fear became the main factor in the spread of the plague, not biologically but socially. People began to change their behavior. Neighbors avoided each other. Relatives abandoned the sick. Physicians refused to visit. Priests feared hearing the confessions of the dying. This was not cruelty. It was despair. In a world where no one understood the cause of the disease, any approach seemed a mortal risk. Cities tried to protect themselves. Gates were closed. The first forms of quarantine appeared. not as medical measures, but as acts of desperate isolation. Travelers were turned away. Merchants were expelled. Sometimes entire families were locked inside their homes. These decisions were hasty, uncoordinated, but driven by one goal: to stop the unknown. Yet fear also demanded explanation. If a disease cannot be understood, it must be blamed on someone. Strangers, minorities, wanderers came under suspicion. In some regions, waves of violence erupted, fueled by the belief that the plague was caused by conspiracy or witchcraft. These reactions were not universal, but they were a worrying symptom. A society built on faith and order was losing its bearings. The church faced particular pressure. For a medieval person, faith was inseparable from life. Disease, war, famine, all had spiritual explanations, but the plague challenged the system. Prayers did not halt death. Processions did not bring relief. Sometimes they only accelerated the spread. This did not mean people abandoned religion. On the contrary, many clung to it even more. Movements of extreme penitence, self-flagellation, and public repentance emerged. People tried to regain control over the world through suffering and sacrifice. Yet even these practices provided no answer to why some died while others survived. Fear also changed the perception of life. Previously, death was distant, albeit inevitable. Now, it became a constant companion. People lived in anticipation, not of tomorrow, but of the next silence. This is reflected in letters, chronicles, and art. Themes of mortality, time, and the fragility of human existence came to the forefront precisely during this period. At the same time, not all society descended into chaos. Some continued to work. Some cared for the sick. Some documented events, aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. It is thanks to these people that we can reconstruct the events today. By the middle of the epidemic, Europe had already changed, not in numbers, but in spirit. The plague shattered confidence in the stability of the world. It showed that order could disappear without war, without an enemy, without warning. And this experience did not vanish after it passed. It remained in collective memory. But fear is not only destruction. Sometimes it is the beginning of change. And it is precisely this, the consequences in the new world after the plague, that will be explored in Part 3. When the plague finally began to recede, Europe did not return to what it had been. The disease left behind more than empty houses and silent streets. It left a transformed society. Entire regions had lost a significant part of their population. Fields stood untended. Workshops lacked workers. Labor, once abundant and cheap, became scarce and valuable. Survivors found themselves in a new position. They could demand better conditions, higher wages, and greater independence. This shift quietly weakened the rigid social hierarchy that had defined medieval life. The authority of institutions also changed. The church remained powerful, but it was no longer unquestioned. People remembered that prayers had not stopped the plague, and that priests had died like everyone else. Faith endured, yet it became more personal, less absolute. Doubt entered spaces where certainty had once ruled. Culturally, the impact was profound. Art, literature, and thought turned toward the human experience. Mortality, time, and individual life gained new importance. The obsession with death did not disappear, but was accompanied by a renewed focus on living. Many historians see in this shift the early foundations of the Renaissance. Medicine, too, began to change. Though true scientific understanding was still far away, observation and record-keeping slowly replaced superstition. Cities remembered the value of isolation, cleanliness, and control of movement. These lessons would resurface in later centuries, when Europe faced new epidemics. Most importantly, the plague altered how people understood the world. It revealed that history could turn without warning, without armies or kings. Invisible forces could reshape civilization. The Black Death was not merely a catastrophe. It was a dividing line. Europe that emerged afterward was more cautious, more questioning, and more aware of human fragility. From loss came transformation, and from fear, a new understanding of life itself.